First of today's 3 videos of countries and all. And yeah, and now we're on Singapore, which I kind of mentioned yesterday, as it kind of interlinked with Malaysia a little bit. And yeah, today is a little bit more focused on Singapore over Malaysia and Singapore on the side. Now today it's Singapore, mainly Singapore with Malaysia on the side and all. And yeah, as here we go, as according to a legend, Singapore was founded centuries ago when a prince from Sumatra landed on the island and saw a lion. And he took it as a good omen and founded a city called Singapore, which means Lion City, and we'll get more on that later. He took it, and the legend may or may not have been true or not. And in fact, the name Singapore was not recorded until the 16th century, and Singapore was only really a trading post with a small population, not a city and all that. As modern Singapore was founded in 1819 by Sir Stamford Raffles, who lived from 1781 to 1826, I think. As Raffles became a clerk for the British East India Company in 1795, and he rose rapidly in the company. And in 1805, he was sent to Penang, and in 1811 he was made Lieutenant Governor of Java. And in 1818 Raffles was made Governor of Bencoolen on the island of Sumatra, and Raffles believed the British could establish a base on the Straits of Malacca. And in 1819 he landed on the island of what is now Singapore, as the island consisted of swamps, jungle and a small population, but Raffles realised it could be made into like a useful part and all that. And at the time, two men were vying to become Sultan of the Empire of Johor, which controlled Singapore, and in 1812 the Sultan died and his two sons quarrelled over succession and all. As Raffles supported the older brother Hussein and recognised him as Sultan, as the Raffles made a deal with him, as the British East India Company was given Singapore in return for a small annual payment. And in 1824 the company was given the island in return for a lump sum of money, as the British established new trading post at Singapore, and it grew very rapidly, as well as Europeans, Malays, Chinese, Indians and Arabs came to live and work there. And in 1824 the population had risen to 10,000. And in 1826 Singapore was joined with Malacca and Penang to form a straight settlement. And in 1867 Singapore became a crown colony and ruled directly by the British government rather than the East India Company. And in 1870 the population of Singapore had risen to 100,000, which was a big jump from like 40 years earlier in 1824 when it was 10,000. And many grand buildings were erected in Singapore in the 19th and early 20th century, and among them was the Victoria Theatre and Concert Hall, which was built in 1862, and several times temples were built. And at the time the Tian Hock Keng Temple, which was built in 1842, this and temple was first built in 1823, but was rebuilt in 1843. And the Srinivasa Perumal Temple was built in 1855, and the Long Sun Si Temple was built in 1917, and the Sakyamuni Buddha Gaya Temple was built in 1927 and all. And when the Suez Canal was built in 1869, Singapore became even more important as a gateway between Europe and East Asia and all that. And yeah, and in the early 20th century, Singapore continued to prosper as huge amounts of rubber and tin from the region were exported from Singapore. And meanwhile, Chinese immigrants continued to arrive in Singapore, and in January 1942, the Japanese conquered Malaysia, and on the 15th of February 1942, Singapore was forced to surrender, as the Japanese called Singapore Yunnan, which means the light of the south, but their rule was tyrannical, and thousands of Chinese Singaporeans were executed, as Chinese weren't all too favourable in Japanese eyes at the time. But Japan surrendered in August 1945, and on the 5th of September that same year the British reoccupied Singapore and all. But after 1945, Singapore slowly moved towards independence, and in 1946 the Strait settlements were dissolved and Singapore was separate from Malaysia as the People's Action Party was formed in 1954, and it proved to be a major force in Singaporean politics. And in 1955 a new constitution was introduced, and under it 25 of 32 members of the legislature were elected, and in 1957 it was replaced by an elected 51-member legislature, as the People's Action Party led by Lee Kuan Yew won 43 out of the 51 seats, as self-government was granted in 1959, as Lee Kuan Yew became Prime Minister, and in 1963 Singapore joined over Malaysia. However, the union was short-lived, as it left 2 years later in 1965 and became completely independent. And from 1965 to the 1990s, Singapore enjoyed rapid growth, economic growth and all. And in the 1990s, it was a newly industrialised country and had a high standard of living. However, the government was authoritarian and society was strictly controlled. In 1990, Lee Kuan Yew resigned as Prime Minister, and he was replaced by Goh Tong, and he introduced a more liberal regime. And today Singapore is a prosperous nation with a steadily growing economy and all that, and is a very busy port with a population of about 5.6 million. And yeah, moving on to language. Another proof of Singapore's cosmopolitan status is the adoption of 4 official languages, like Malay, Mandarin, Tamil and English, as English is a medium of education and business, and is the first language taught in schools and the main language used in the workplace. I'm constantly getting emails. And in addition to English, the students study their mother tongue, which is either Mandarin, Malay or Tamil, in schools to ensure that they maintain their cultural heritage. Most Singaporeans are therefore bilingual, if not multilingual. As a predominant usage of English means that expatriates and foreigners living in England, Singapore, find it more easily adaptable countries in Asia and all. And Singaporeans also speak a local brand of English that tends to startle unsuspecting English speakers when they first set foot and all. Affectionately known as Singlish, it's a hybrid of English, Malay and Chinese dialects, which give rise to a unique patois, and that is often a talking point in itself. And yeah. And it's because even if you might misplace and all that, a few things in it, it will still give you a couple of smiles for effort and all that. And yeah, moving on to legends. And yeah, Singapore is a city of colourful identities and shown through the heritage and all that, food and culture, among many other things. And yeah, as we go into the folklore a little bit, and first is the Lion City, which are mentioned in history, as one of the favourites among many locals, even though it's no longer told. As back in the 1200s, a prince of Sumatra, of the Sumatran Srivijaya Empire, Sangnila Umata, was hunting on an island close to the then undiscovered Singapore. They chased a deer to the top of a cliff and spotted another island across the sea, which his chief minister said was called Temasek, which was Singapore's traditional name, or Sea Town in Old Javanese. As the prince returned to his ship to make the crossing to Temasek, but a storm forced him and the men to discard heavy items into the sea and stop the ship from sinking. It didn't seem to help, so the prince was urged to throw his crown overboard to appease the sea, and he relented, and the storm quickly abated, and allowing him to arrive on the shores of Temasek. The prince soon spotted a wild animal with an orange mane, and his minister claimed it was a lion, or Sinkar, which is the Sanskrit word for lion. Believing that it to be a good omen, the prince decided to stay on the island and named the island Singapore, or Lion City. Moving on from one big cat to another big cat, like Crouching Tiger or Hidden Past and all that. As in modern times, we know that Singapore was never home to lions, but was home to the Malayan tiger, Stelicitzi Merion, was the lion's head and the body of a fish. It remains one of the country's icons, and you'll find the 5 official Melion statues around Singapore, 2 of which are located in Melion Park in One Fullerton. And yeah. And the next facts I'm going to tell you about the tiger is as a lost tiger in Singapore was shot while cowering on a table in Raffles Hotel bars and billiards room in 1902, and in the reign of the tigers in Singapore and all. Then there's the moving on to the magic turtle. So apart from Sentosa Island, Singapore comprises of 60 other islands, several of which are accessible by boat and all. And up to Southern Island cruise to explore Kusu Island, and Kusu, spelled Kusu, meaning turtle in the Hokkien dialect, which remains tied to several legends. In one, a giant turtle saved a group of sailors from rough waters by turning itself into an island, and the sailors returned the following year with offerings to show their gratitude. And today, the island houses a Chinese temple and 3 Malay kramat, those were called holy shrines to Malay saints. And however this for a little more magic, the island continues to attract 100,000 Taoist, Buddhists and Confucian pilgrims annually, and these obscure religious sites across Singapore have a far reaching roots in history and all. And moving on to the last legend, when you thought you couldn't exactly get away from Greek mythology a little too much, as Singapore has its own Hercules. As this kind of and Badang is a Malay hero in ancient Singapore who may have been the country's only answer to Hercules, if at all. And a poor fisherman who lived on the banks of the Singapore River. He would set a trap to catch fish every evening, and when he discovered a water jinn, or spirit, had been stealing his fish, he trapped the spirit, who promised to grant him any power if Badang ate whatever the spirit threw up. And he wish for superhuman strength was granted, and he was soon appointed a court warrior by the Sultan of Singapore, and he was challenged to a duel the strongest man in India in a series of contests, the last of which being a rock throwing competition, as Badang and effortlessly flung a huge rock into the waters, and it landed near the mouth of Singapore, the Singapore River. And years after the legend had been told, a rock was discovered at the same spot with an undecipherable inscription, as the rock was blown up to widen the river, but fragments survive today. And you can find the so-called Singapore stone on display at the National Museum of Singapore and all. And yeah, and that is Singapore for you. And I'll see you all very soon for the next one, which is Iraq. And yeah, like yesterday, I kind of like Malaysia and Singapore and all. I kind of mentioned Iraq yesterday and all. It was censored out magazine, and they've also mentioned the Iran-Iraq war in Iran, like last week at some point. And yeah, I'll see you all for Iraq next. So yeah.